There comes a moment in the life of every empath when the soul grows tired of bleeding for people who would never do the same in return. For years, they were the listener, the healer, the one who stayed awake at night trying to understand why others acted the way they did. They excused betrayal because they saw pain behind the behavior. They tolerated disrespect because they believed love could transform broken people. They carried emotional burdens that were never theirs, and little by little they disappeared beneath the weight of everyone else's expectations. The empath often believes their value is found in how much they can endure. They become addicted to understanding others while abandoning themselves. When someone hurts them, they search for reasons instead of recognizing reality. When someone lies, manipulates, or withdraws affection, the empath does not immediately become angry. Instead, they turn inward. They ask themselves what they could have done better. They try harder. They love deeper. They give more. And this is the tragedy. Because there are people in this world who see kindness not as beauty, but as opportunity. The empath spends years trying to explain their heart to people committed to misunderstanding them. They explain why honesty matters. They explain why words hurt. They explain why silence can wound the soul. But eventually, something shifts deep within them. A realization begins to emerge like thunder in the distance. They understand that people who truly value you do not require endless explanations to treat you with respect. And this realization changes everything. Because the empath finally begins to see that they were not surrounded by people who lacked understanding. They were surrounded by people who benefited from pretending not to understand. There is a profound difference between confusion and indifference. One seeks clarity, the other avoids responsibility. The empath finally recognizes that some people heard every cry, saw every wound, understood every boundary, and violated them anyway. That is the day something inside them starts to die. Not their kindness, not their humanity, but their willingness to endlessly sacrifice themselves for those who feel no guilt in draining them. You must understand something about the empath. They do not stop caring suddenly. It happens slowly, quietly, like a candle fading in a dark room. Every disappointment removes another piece of emotional innocence. Every betrayal teaches another painful lesson. Until one day, they wake up exhausted from carrying relationships that only survive through their effort alone. And when the empath becomes exhausted, silence enters their life. This silence is not weakness. It is not bitterness. It is awareness. The empath stops arguing with people determined to misunderstand them. They stop chasing closure from those incapable of honesty. They stop begging for the bare minimum. Something inside them finally whispers, enough. And those around them are shocked by the transformation. The same people who ignored the empath's tears suddenly panic when the empath becomes emotionally unavailable. Why? Because they were never prepared for the empath to withdraw their energy. They assumed the empath would always remain available, always forgiving, always understanding, always waiting. They confused patience with permanence. But the soul cannot survive forever in places where it is only appreciated for what it provides. Eventually, the empath realizes they have spent their entire life translating their pain into language others could understand, while nobody ever tried to understand theirs. They begin to see how often they abandon themselves just to avoid abandonment from others. And in that painful awareness, a new kind of strength is born. For the first time, the empath stops over-explaining. They no longer write long messages trying to save relationships already poisoned by disrespect. They no longer fight to keep people who constantly make them feel small. They no longer shrink their truth to protect fragile egos. Instead, they become observant, calm, detached from chaos. And this is what frightens people the most, not the empath's anger, but their indifference. Because anger still contains emotional attachment. Indifference means the emotional cord has finally been severed. The empath no longer seeks revenge because they no longer seek validation. They begin protecting their peace with the same intensity they once used to protect others. And suddenly, the person who was once easy to manipulate becomes impossible to control. The empath learns that compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. They understand that constantly rescuing others can become a hidden form of self-neglect. And perhaps most painfully, they realize that some people only loved the version of them that tolerated suffering in silence. But now the silence is different. Now it carries dignity. Now it carries self-respect. Now it carries the quiet power of someone who has finally stopped betraying themselves just to keep others comfortable. And when an empath reaches this stage, there is no returning to who they once were. Because the moment an empath stops explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them, a new person is born. There is a dangerous exhaustion that cannot be seen with the eyes. It does not leave bruises on the skin, yet it slowly crushes the spirit from within. This is the exhaustion the empath eventually encounters after years of carrying emotions that were never theirs to carry. The world often praises the empath for their sensitivity, their compassion, their ability to understand human suffering. But few speak of the hidden cost of feeling everything so deeply. The empath enters relationships believing love means sacrifice. They become the emotional refuge for wounded people. They absorb anxiety, anger, confusion, and pain as though it were their responsibility to heal it. Wherever there is chaos, the empath tries to restore peace. Wherever there is brokenness, they attempt to become the solution. And for a while, this gives them purpose. They feel needed, valuable, important, but there is a difference between love and emotional servitude. The empath does not notice when this line begins to disappear. Slowly, they become addicted to fixing people who refuse to fix themselves. They become so focused on saving others that they neglect the slow destruction happening within their own soul. And because empaths are deeply intuitive, they often sense the hidden wounds inside toxic individuals. They see the abandoned child behind the manipulator. They see insecurity behind arrogance. They see fear beneath cruelty. And this vision becomes both their gift and their curse. Because when you can see the pain inside people, you begin excusing behaviors that should never be tolerated. The empath tells themselves they act this way because they are hurting. And while this may be true, it does not change the damage being done. Pain does not justify destruction. Trauma does not excuse betrayal. Yet the empath continues giving chance after chance, believing their patience will eventually inspire transformation. But some people do not heal through love. Some people consume it, and the empath learns this lesson in the most painful way possible. There comes a moment when emotional exhaustion transforms into something colder. Not hatred, not cruelty, but detachment. The empath who once cried over every conflict suddenly feels numb. The person who once overthought every interaction stops reacting altogether. This transformation confuses people because they mistake emotional detachment for heartlessness. But the truth is far more tragic. The empath is not becoming cruel. They are becoming emotionally exhausted beyond repair. You must understand what repeated betrayal does to a sensitive soul. Every broken promise teaches the empath to trust less. Every manipulation teaches them to question sincerity. Every moment of neglect forces them to confront a terrifying reality: not everyone deserves access to their heart. And eventually, survival instincts awaken. The empath begins withdrawing emotionally, not because they no longer care, but because caring has become dangerous to their well-being. They discover that constantly pouring into people who drain them leaves nothing for themselves. They realize they have spent years setting themselves on fire just to keep others warm. And now there is nothing left to burn. This is why the empath stops chasing people, stops pleading, stops over-explaining. They no longer fight to convince others of their value because exhaustion has stripped away the illusion that love can be forced. The empath finally understands that no amount of loyalty can heal someone committed to misunderstanding you. And this realization changes their entire relationship with the world. The empath begins observing more than speaking. They notice patterns they once ignored. They recognize how often their kindness attracted narcissism, how often their compassion invited manipulation, how often people confused their forgiveness with weakness. The empath finally sees that many relationships survived only because they tolerated what should have ended long ago. Now their energy changes, the emotional desperation disappears, the need for approval fades. They stop fearing abandonment because they discover something far worse than loneliness, losing themselves while trying to keep others. And when an empath reaches this understanding, emotional detachment becomes a form of self-protection. People around them become uncomfortable with this new version. Those who benefited from the empath's endless emotional availability suddenly accuse them of changing. But what they truly mean is this: you no longer allow me to control your emotions. Because toxic people depend upon emotional access. They survive by provoking reactions, creating guilt, demanding endless understanding while offering none in return. But the detached empath becomes difficult to manipulate because they stop participating in emotional chaos. They no longer argue with people committed to distortion. They no longer defend themselves against false accusations. They no longer sacrifice inner peace to maintain superficial harmony. And this silence unsettles those who once depended upon the empath's emotional labor. But deep within this silence, something powerful is happening. The empath is beginning to return to themselves. For years, their identity was built around being needed, around rescuing others, around proving their worth through emotional sacrifice. But now they are discovering a deeper truth. True love does not require self-destruction. And perhaps for the first time in their life, the empath begins asking a question they were always too afraid to ask. What about me? What about their exhaustion? What about their wounds? What about the years spent abandoning themselves for people who never intended to do the same in return? This question marks the beginning of awakening. Because once the empath understands that protecting their peace is not selfish, they become impossible to emotionally enslave again. And the person who once carried everyone else's pain finally puts down the weight that was never theirs to carry. There is a moment in every empath's awakening that feels almost invisible from the outside, yet it changes everything within. It is the moment they discover something most people never expected from them: power. Not loud power, not aggressive power, not the kind that dominates others through fear, but a quieter, more dangerous force, the power of emotional independence. For years, people misunderstood the empath. They looked at their kindness and saw softness. They looked at their patience and saw weakness. They looked at their forgiveness and assumed fragility. The empath became an easy target for those who confused gentleness with surrender. They were expected to absorb the emotional storms of others without ever creating one of their own. They were expected to tolerate disrespect because they were the understanding one. They were expected to stay no matter how badly they were treated. And the tragic part is this: the empath often accepted these roles without resistance, not because they lacked strength, but because they believed love required endurance. They believed goodness meant self-sacrifice. They believed that being deeply compassionate meant making room for everyone, even those who came only to consume them. But every human being has a threshold. There comes a point where repeated emotional injury awakens something dormant in the soul. A hidden force begins to rise, not from anger but from clarity. The empath begins to see what they once refused to see. They recognize how often they were manipulated by guilt, how often their empathy was exploited, how often people used their tenderness as a doorway into their boundaries. And then something remarkable happens. They stop participating. At first, the world barely notices. The empath simply becomes quieter, less reactive, less available. They no longer answer every emotional demand. They no longer rush to solve every crisis. They no longer interrupt their own peace to rescue those committed to chaos. And suddenly, the balance shifts. Those who once held power over the empath begin to feel something unfamiliar: discomfort. Why? Because their influence depended entirely on the empath's emotional availability. Manipulators cannot manipulate what they cannot access. Control disappears the moment emotional dependency ends. The empath once feared losing people. Now they fear losing themselves. And this single change transforms their entire presence. You see, when an empath stops caring in the old way, they do not become cold. They become clear. They stop confusing compassion with obligation. They stop believing that understanding someone's pain means tolerating their abuse. They stop translating cruelty into excuses. And this clarity creates a new kind of discipline. Now the empath says no without guilt. They walk away without over-explaining. They protect their time without apology. They let silence answer questions that once consumed entire nights of emotional overthinking. This is the dangerous power no one expected, because people prepared themselves for the empath's tears. They prepared for their forgiveness. They prepared for their return. But they did not prepare for their absence. Nothing unsettles a toxic person more than realizing the person they took for granted has emotionally left the room, even while standing right in front of them. The empath no longer reacts to manipulation because they finally see it. They no longer defend themselves against distorted narratives because they understand that truth does not need desperation. They no longer chase closure because they have discovered something greater than closure: freedom. And freedom is terrifying to those who once benefited from your emotional captivity. But there is another layer to this transformation. The empath begins redirecting energy. This is where true power emerges. For years, their emotional resources were spent outward, toward broken relationships, unstable people, endless misunderstandings. But now that energy begins flowing inward, into healing, into discipline, into self-respect, into purpose. The same intensity they once used to save others is now used to rebuild themselves. And what a magnificent sight that becomes. The empath starts reading more, thinking more clearly, sleeping more peacefully, creating stronger boundaries. They become less interested in drama and more interested in direction, less concerned with being liked and more committed to being whole. They no longer seek validation because they have learned to validate themselves. And when a human being reaches this state, they become extraordinarily difficult to manipulate. Why? Because manipulation requires emotional hunger. But the healed empath is no longer starving. They do not need attention to feel worthy. They do not need approval to feel secure. They do not need constant reassurance to feel loved. Their center of gravity is moved inward. This is emotional sovereignty, and it changes how the world responds to them. Some people will call them distant. Others will say they have changed. Some may even accuse them of becoming selfish. But these accusations reveal more about the accuser than the empath. What they truly mourn is the loss of access. They miss the old version, the one who tolerated too much, forgave too quickly, and abandoned themselves to keep everyone else comfortable. But that version is gone, and it should be. Because growth often looks like betrayal to those who benefited from your self-neglect. The empath understands now that their greatest power was never their ability to feel deeply. It was their ability to survive deeply, to endure betrayal without becoming bitter, to experience pain without becoming cruel, to walk through darkness without surrendering their humanity. And now, with emotional independence in hand, they become something extraordinary. Not hardened, not closed, but unshakable. They still love, but wisely. They still care, but selectively. They still feel, but with boundaries. And perhaps, most importantly, they no longer hand their emotional keys to people who have not earned the right to enter. This is the dangerous power people never expected. The quiet strength of someone who no longer needs to be chosen because they have finally chosen themselves. After all the exhaustion, after the silence, after the emotional detachment and painful awakenings, something unexpected begins to happen within the empath. What once felt like an ending slowly reveals itself as a beginning. The collapse they feared was not destruction, it was transformation. For the first time in their life, they are no longer building themselves around the needs of others. They are beginning the sacred process of returning home to themselves. This is the rebirth few people understand. Most people only notice the empath when they are giving, when they are rescuing, when they are sacrificing their own peace to hold everyone else together. But almost nobody witnesses the quiet resurrection that occurs after the empath finally stops abandoning themselves. At first, the empath feels empty, and this emptiness can be frightening. Because for years, their identity was intertwined with emotional labor. They knew who they were in relation to others. The helper, the listener, the protector, the healer. But once they stop overextending themselves, they are confronted with a painful question. Who am I when I am no longer saving everyone else? This question becomes the doorway to transformation. You see, many empaths spend their entire lives disconnected from their own desires. They become experts at reading others while remaining strangers to themselves. They know everyone's wounds, everyone's fears, everyone's emotional patterns, but they do not know their own soul. Their attention has always been directed outward. Now, for the first time, life turns them inward. And in that silence, they begin meeting the person they were always meant to become. The empath starts noticing simple things again. The peace of solitude, the beauty of stillness, the relief of no longer carrying conversations that drain the spirit. They begin realizing how exhausted they truly were. How much energy was wasted trying to earn love from emotionally unavailable people. How much of their life disappeared inside relationships built upon imbalance. But something miraculous happens when emotional chaos leaves the soul. Clarity enters. The empath begins seeing life differently. Their intuition sharpens because it is no longer clouded by desperation for connection. Their mind becomes calmer because they are no longer trapped in endless cycles of emotional confusion. Their body begins recovering from years of internal stress. Even their spirit feels lighter. Why? Because peace returns when self-betrayal ends. This is the stage where the empath finally understands that protecting their energy is not selfish, it is wisdom. And with this wisdom comes a profound shift in identity. The empath no longer seeks people who need saving. They seek people who bring mutual respect. They no longer confuse intensity with love. They no longer romanticize suffering. They no longer chase emotionally unavailable individuals, hoping their compassion will finally be enough to unlock affection. Instead, they become deeply intentional about who enters their inner world. This changes everything. For years, the empath believed love meant endurance. Now they understand love also requires boundaries. Without boundaries, kindness becomes self-destruction. Without discernment, empathy becomes an invitation for exploitation. And so the reborn empath becomes selective, not because they hate humanity, but because they finally value themselves. This new version of the empath no longer fears walking alone. In fact, solitude becomes sacred to them. They discover that loneliness is far less painful than constantly shrinking themselves to fit inside unhealthy relationships. They begin enjoying their own company. They rediscover forgotten passions, hidden creativity, neglected dreams. Parts of themselves that were buried beneath emotional exhaustion slowly return to life. And perhaps the most beautiful transformation is this. The empath stops apologizing for their sensitivity. For so long, the world made them believe their deep emotions were weakness, that caring deeply made them fragile, that needing peace made them difficult. But now they understand that their sensitivity was never the problem. The problem was giving their tenderness to people incapable of valuing it. And once this truth settles into the soul, confidence begins to emerge naturally. Not arrogance, not ego, but quiet certainty. The empath no longer needs to prove their worth because they have finally recognized it within themselves. They stop chasing validation because they no longer build their identity upon the opinions of unstable people. They become grounded, present, emotionally aware without being emotionally consumed. This is true healing. Not becoming cold, not shutting down the heart, but learning how to love without abandoning yourself in the process. And as the empath evolves, something fascinating occurs. The same people who once overlooked them begin noticing their absence. The same individuals who drained their energy suddenly realize the light is gone. But by now, the empath understands something they once struggled to accept. Not everyone deserves access to your soul. This understanding creates peace. The empath no longer feels responsible for fixing broken people. They no longer carry guilt for walking away from environments that destroy their mental and emotional well-being. They understand that compassion does not require self-sacrifice. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is distance. And in this rebirth, the empath becomes unstoppable. Because now their energy is no longer leaking into toxic cycles. Now it is being invested into purpose, into growth, into inner peace, into becoming whole. The empath who once lived seeking acceptance now lives seeking truth. And truth transforms them into someone far more powerful than the world ever imagined. A person who has suffered deeply, awakened fully, and finally learned the sacred art of protecting their own soul. And once an empath reaches this level of self-awareness, they no longer fear losing others, because they have finally found themselves.